You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your five-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. It's good to see you, Geoff.
Good to see you too.
It's a busy time for free enterprisers, eh?
It is, and I got a battlefield promotion. Mike's been called away, and I know it's too sensitive to share with us, but I bet he's trying to cobble together that free enterprise coalition that's been struggling a bit in recent days.
Yeah, we'll have him back in the strategy suite, and we can try and needle him to try and get some more info and some of the real details of what he's really up to. Sounds good.
I can't wait. It's my favorite part.
Well, and that's what Strategy Suite will be today. We're going to spend some time. We are really going to do kind of a step-by-step breakdown of the merger that never was, and offer our projections for what's next for Kevin Falcon, John Rustad, and David Eby, all of whom have good reasons to be unhappy about how this is playing out. We'll also talk about the latest nominations. But first, we've got a guest who knows what it takes to bring a political party back from the brink of extinction. Our guest today is Carole James. She got started as a school board trustee and was later recruited to run the NDP. She represented Victoria Beacon Hill from 2005 to 2020, including as the first female leader of the opposition, also the first woman of Métis descent elected to the Legislative Assembly. In 2017, she became Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance to John Horgan before resigning in late 2020. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Carole James.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's great to be here. Geoff, nice to see you again. Sorry to miss Mike, Carole. But I'm sure I have lots of details when he comes back. Everybody will be listening to find out what's happening, the most updated piece.
It's a bring the popcorn kind of time for BC politics.
It's not boring. People, I think, were worried that we were kind of losing our reputation for the most active and crazy politics. I think we're back there again now.
I think we're back. BC is back. It's great.
Exactly.
It's great. Carole, I wanted to take a little bit because actually I was I know you well from your time as particularly as Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance, but I went back to understand a bit more of your story and hadn't realized you were born in London. And then the family actually moved to Saskatchewan, and it was I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about there was an event with your grandmother getting very badly injured in a snowstorm that brought you to BC. Is that correct? What happened there?
It is correct, and I often tell the story because I think all of us have backgrounds that have brought us where we are. And certainly for me, my background and my growing up influenced all of the work that I ended up doing later in life. So I was actually born in Lancashire, Northern England, in Duckham-Field, a little place called Duckham-Field. And my mom was a single parent. She was young, 17, and had me in England. My grandparents had immigrated by that point to Saskatchewan, North Battleford. Many New Democrats come from Saskatchewan and end up out here. And we lived in Saskatchewan for a couple of years. My mom went to teachers college, got her certificate. She knew being a single mom raising kids, she was going to have to make sure that she had some kind of job that was going to work with raising two kids by herself. My grandmother was a nurse at the hospital in North Battleford and ended up being caught in a snowstorm coming home from work one day. Probably today they could have saved her leg, but at that point gangrene set in and she ended up having her leg amputated. So I just imagine, my mom at 18 has two babies. My birth father had said he didn't want a wife who worked and so had kicked her out of the house. She moved in with my grandparents. My grandmother, in a country that she wasn't keen on, was raising now two grandkids while my mom went off to teachers college and would hitchhike back home from Saskatoon and see us. So we ended up in Victoria because my grandmother looked on a map to see the place that had the least amount of snow in all of Canada. And that's how we ended up in Victoria. So I always say I was raised by two incredibly strong women who really did influence the fact that you could do anything that you wanted to when you were growing up.
And how old were you when you moved to Victoria?
I was young. I was just going into grade one. So we moved to Victoria in 1963. And I was just going into school at that time period. So Victoria really is home, and our family didn't travel very far. James Bay is where we moved to when we moved here. I'm still living in James Bay. My mom, until she passed away a couple of years ago, was living in James Bay. My daughter's living in James Bay. So it's strong, long roots in the community. I say it's pretty rare as an MLA you get to go into a grocery store and have your grade 4 teacher still remember you and say hello and have a chance to have those connections. So I feel really fortunate that I was able to represent a community that I grew up in and had such long roots in.
Is your those connections to education and your mom being a teacher, is that what brought you to become a school trustee?
It certainly had part of it to do with it. I though never saw myself as a politician. I was probably the most surprised when a group of people from school board came to meet with me to say that they were looking for someone who could meet their values that they had around support for public education and support for services for students with special needs. I grew up with foster children in our house when my grandparents were raising us. They had foster kids as I grew up, and then my husband and I also fostered for 20 years. So I had a connection to special education in particular. And my mom taught special education as well. So I think there's no question that modeling and that connection in the household made a big difference. But I never would have run, and I often tell women this in particular, I never would have run for school board if I hadn't had a group of people come and approach me and talk about the fact that they had experience. They felt that it was a job I could do. I was president of the District Parent Association. And so that encouragement and that kind of support really helped me make the leap into something that I didn't ever picture myself doing. It wasn't something I ever saw. Certainly my family was active and engaged in the peace movement in particular. My family's house was a safe house for draft dodgers during the Vietnam War. I grew up on picket lines. That's kind of what we did in our household for entertainment and for showing our passion was to go down and protest, particularly during the war years. And so, but I never saw myself as a politician. So getting involved in school board was an absolutely terrifying point for me. I tell people my parents put me into theater when I was about 10, community theater, in hopes that I would learn to speak publicly because they never thought I would. I was so painfully shy. So I tell people, beware where you put your kids and what courses you pick. You never know what'll happen.
Well, Carole, I think I first met you when you were head of the school trustees, and I was working for the NDP government of the day, and you were certainly seen as a sympathetic and honest advocate, but not an NDP, activist or, you were seen as certainly speaking for that group. What convinced you to make the next jump to electoral politics, which is a whole different ballgame in many respects?
It certainly was, and you're right. I was always proud of the fact that when I was president of BC School Trustees in 2001, that all 3 political parties approached me to ask if I'd be interested in running. 3 at the time. Now we're starting to add up again in British Columbia, but at the time there were 3 political parties.
You need a whole waiting room now.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. But 2001 was, as you know well, Geoff and others, but it was a tough election for New Democrats. It was a time when, you would approach people door knocking and they would close their blinds. If they saw you were a New Democrat, they'd run into the backyard and lock the front door. And our MLA, Gretchen Bruin at the time, who was Speaker of the House for a while as well, was stepping down. And I had a number of people approach me and see if I'd be interested. And it was one of those elections for me where everyone can run in the good times, but in the really challenging times, you need someone who will stand up for the values that matter. And so I guess kind of a pattern in my life, I've taken jobs on when they've not been the easiest time, when they've been a difficult, tough time. And so I ran for the nomination in Victoria Beacon Hill, and my first election was the toughest election of all, where we ended up with 2 seats. But for about 3 weeks, myself and a neighboring MLA were still in the running as they were doing recounts. So we had a recount. I lost in the end by a couple of hundred votes. It was 28 votes on election night. So it was a good lesson. I think you learn as much from your failures as you do from your successes. And certainly for me, I felt it was a good run when I looked back on running for leader later on, that gave me an opportunity to be able to expand my horizons in the work that was to come.
What was the lesson you took from that?
I think a couple of things. One, how important it is to stand up for your values, to know yourself, what's important and what matters. And I think that election gave you a chance to be able to describe that. Why did it matter? Why did you need new Democrats in the legislature? We were being tossed out at the time. And so to be able to talk about things that mattered, to be able to talk about supports for kids with special needs, or childcare and the importance that childcare plays, or the importance of making sure that there's a balanced approach, that you're supporting people who have needs in the province. Those kinds of things were really critical. But later on, it also showed me, because I ended up going to Prince George and doing some work up north in child welfare. And it also gave me an opportunity to see a part of the province that I hadn't lived in. I lived in Victoria, grown up in an urban setting. And so I think those 2 years were so critical to my learning about the challenges that people face. You can read all about it, you can do all the studying you want, but until you actually have an experience of living in those communities, seeing the challenges, the difference in whether it's supports or whether it's the economy, it gave me a really good grounding that I didn't have before I'd done that work.
Yeah, I'll just stay on this for a minute. You were reminding me, because in one of the best things about tough cases in politics is they tend to give us our firsts. So, to give you an example, a lot of the first ministers who are women were handed sort of these sort of tough case scenarios. And in your case, you brought a lot of firsts to your role as leader of the opposition. I'm wondering for you, like, it takes some audacity to take something on like that. It takes some audacity to take a party that is reduced to, is it 3 members at the time? And
Two.
then 2 members, sorry, 2 members at the time, and to rebuild it. And like, why were you the person who said, yeah, I'll do that? Sign me up.
And you're right. You're right. There's no question. It took a lot of thinking on my part as well. I spent, I think, all of the June and then the July long weekend knowing I had to make a decision. I was living in Prince George at the time, went camping with my husband, who said, by the end of the weekend, you have to make a decision. Can't keep going back and forth. You're going to have to decide if you want to jump into the race. And a couple things really stuck with me. I think one was a number of elders who I had worked with over a couple of years that I would often get advice from. One of them said to me, if you have the ability to get on that stage and use some of the information that you've gathered from our communities, some of the experiences you've had and the challenges we have, you have an obligation and a responsibility to share that. And that really stuck with me because I have had some extraordinary experiences, challenging, tough experiences in the area of child welfare. And, I didn't go into the race, to be honest, I didn't go into the race expecting that I was going to win. There were others who had been MLAs. I had not had experience in the legislature. I was the only woman running at the time. But it really stuck with me. If I have a chance to be able to do that, if I have a chance to be able to take my learning experiences from these extraordinary communities and my own home community growing up, that I had a responsibility to do it. And the other thing is, you need someone who is willing to do hard work. And I'm willing to do hard work. I'm willing to take on the tough times. And I knew it'd be a challenge. I knew it'd be a huge challenge. And I've never steered away. It's probably the part of the job. I don't miss the cut and thrust of the legislature. I don't miss question period in any way, shape, or form. But I miss the problem solving sometimes, because that's really, I think, the best part of the job, is the chance to be able to solve some of those things. So it took a huge leap, but I'm really glad I did it, even with the way things turned out, even with the challenges that came later on. The chance to be able to rebuild the party and to also shape it to really meet the needs of British Columbians, because it's a unique time when your party is at that kind of place to be able to talk about what our values, I guess going back to values, to talk about what your values are, to talk about what you stand for as a party, to modernize some of the pieces. We were going through a huge modernization of the party itself, looking at how people voted at convention. Did votes allocate to the amount of money that people donated, or was it one member, one vote? I felt very strongly about that. And so there were pieces and opportunities there in having a party that needed rebuilding that I thought were exciting and were time.
There's some interesting parallels and great differences, of course, between the situation of the NDP with two MLAs in 2001, and you weren't one of them. So 2005, getting ready for the next election. And in retrospect, many people told me, and I thought myself, we could have won that one, and we did very well, but it certainly was like an elevator coming up sharply from ground level to, I can't remember how many seats, but a significant caucus created. Were there points during that period you thought we were going to be successful in 2005, or in your own mind, was it always a two-term thing? And do you see any parallels with the surge happening with the Conservatives today in terms of public attention and so on?
That's true. It's an interesting look. I think it was the only election where you could lose and feel like you won, because election night really did feel like a win. I think for all New Democrats to go from 2 seats, then we won a by-election, so we'd gone to 3 seats. And then we won 33. We had 33 seats on election night, and so to be able to have that kind of jump was incredibly exciting, and I think really boosted people back up to know the work that was then going to be ahead. I did not expect we'd win. I knew that was going to be a huge leap, but to see those kinds of numbers felt like a win, and I think in many cases was a win. There are people who've looked back and said maybe it would have been better not to have such a big jump. Maybe it would have been better to go halfway, just because of a lot of inexperienced people who came in together and faced those challenges. And then looking at what's going on now, I mean, I think the difference that we felt as New Democrats was, number one, we were coming back from strength. We'd had strength, we'd had government. And so I think people felt we were coming back from strength. Whereas for the Conservatives, right now, the provincial Conservatives, I certainly see so much of the energy and the strength that they're building coming from the federal Conservative Party. So much of the boost really is, from my perspective, is really coming from the Poilievre kind of wave that has happened over this last year, and the strength that's there, not necessarily from inside the party. Whereas I think for the 2005 election, New Democrats were pumped. They were ready. They wanted to see the energy come back. They realized that we needed to reach out. We needed to broaden our base as a party. That's certainly the platform that I ran on when I ran in 2003 for the leadership. And people were ready. They were ready to get that work done. And I think that's a very different, I see a riding the wave much more now than I did back in 2005. I think it was really coming back to strength, looking at the work that needed to be done and looking ahead at getting that done.
Well, one of the things I think you did a lot of work on, and that maybe we've seen unfurl over time, is changing the relationship between the NDP and the business community. I'm going to say, as an outsider coming to this province, there is even still, I think, some pretty strong salience to this idea of a kind of the business community belonging to, I'm going to say, the BC Liberal brand more than the new iterations, and just being not NDP. And I'm curious, what, how did you go to build that out and to try and to begin the work of unfurling that?
Well, I think you're quite right, Kate. There's no question that BC is unique, I think, across the country when it comes to that divide that has so often been there in politics. We are definitely the left over here with the social groups and the right over here with the business groups. And from my perspective, it's a false dichotomy. It's not accurate. When you look at budgets, when you look at spending, when you look at the approaches that have been taken. And so it was a very large part of the leadership race and a very large discussion about how we could make sure that people weren't seeing things as left or right, that people weren't dividing off into the old camps. And that took a lot of work. I mean, it took a lot of work to get into some of those offices, to meet with senior management, to meet with CEOs, to get into companies, to take time to visit businesses, to make sure that the issues that we were bringing forward had a balanced approach. Because in fact, British Columbians don't think of themselves as left or right. Only those of us who are quite involved in politics use those terms. British Columbians don't use those terms. You can look at progressive conservatives kind of approach from years back, and many of the same policies fit with New Democrats who are looking for a balanced approach. So I think, again, and John Horgan always said it best, it's we need to look at what the people want in British Columbia, and the people don't want a left and a right. They don't want business over here and labor over here and New Democrats over here. They're looking for a balanced approach. I think, in the most part, most British Columbians want their money looked after, people looked after who are in need, and a pretty balanced approach to governing. And I think that's, as I said, took a lot of work, but I think that was key to making sure that we rebuilt the party in a modern, progressive way.
Do you think
really important? Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
Well, I can't resist because she said the word balance.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I'll start if you want to build on it, Geoff. I'm just thinking, like, I think I wonder how you feel about how, I'm going to say, the broader public, and then maybe more specifically the BC public, right, have come to feel about balanced budgets and what those mean and don't mean, and how salient in BC we feel this moment where we're running historic deficits. How are people feeling about that? Is that something you think, if you were Minister of Finance, you'd be cautious of?
Well, I think the challenge that has happened over the last number of years, of course, is COVID. Nobody could have imagined the kind of situation, and this applies to governments across the country. This applies to our federal government as well. It's not certainly BC's agenda. It's in fact across the country, where I think people expected that there would be spending in COVID. There was a real shift around talking about balance versus deficit budgets. I think the public shifted during that time period because they recognized how critical it was for government to be there to support businesses, to support families, to make sure that people were able to get through COVID. And I think there isn't a cliff to be able to say we're done with COVID. Certainly, if you talk to business leaders, they will talk to you about the challenges of having to pay back some of the COVID benefits, and the fact that they haven't returned to business as usual pre-COVID. And so I think we're in a unique time. It's always important for former finance ministers to remind people that context matters, where you are in each budget cycle matters. And so for us, certainly we had the opportunity to be able to balance the budget the first couple of years, to be able to put those pieces in place, and then COVID hit. So the fact that we're continuing to see the challenges is not a surprise to me. I certainly would hope and encourage the government to look at getting back to balanced budgets. I think that is important to British Columbians. But I think, again, you have to be in there and you have to look at the context and the challenges that governments continue to face, businesses continue to face, the public continues to face when you're doing a budget. So the fact that I'm not there means it's hard for me to know the exact context, but I think post-COVID, those spending dollars are going to continue, I would expect, for the next few years. And I think the public is there. I think they're looking for their money to be managed well. They certainly are looking for their money to be managed well. But I think the deficit versus balanced budget is not as high an agenda as we've seen previously because of COVID.
But you don't think they're because I feel like there's also a lot of drawing of lines between government spending and inflation now too, sort of on the other side. That just, it feels,
Well, and so much of, I think the other, sorry, go ahead, Geoff.
Well, I thought, Kate, you were going to jump into the childcare discussion, because certainly, Carole, you were someone who fought on childcare before you became finance minister. It was arguably the single largest spending initiative of your first budget. It's a 10-year program. How do you think it's going? And is it one of those things that comes and goes in social spending, or do you think it's part of the framework of government obligation now?
I think childcare is a really interesting and important example to look at. I work with the United Way Public Policy Institute now. We talk a lot about how you implement policy in government. And I had the good fortune to come in, having been director of childcare for 2 years in the civil service, and then coming in and seeing it from the political side. But I think one of the keys with childcare was the advocates who for years and years have been working on childcare and getting the public on side and trying to get governments to recognize how important childcare was. The key from my perspective was when the base was broadened to be able to include not simply childcare for moms and for parents and grandparents, but broadened to include business in the economy.
It became economic policy. It became economic
exactly
policy.
Yeah. Exactly. And something I never thought I would see in 2017 was both the Chamber of Commerce and the Board of Trade putting childcare as one of their priorities for any government who was elected in 2017. And that's what you dream of for every policy. The best always is to have everybody supporting it when you go into an election, because you hope then whoever is elected is going to implement it. So that was a huge shift. And I think it's an important lesson for anyone who's looking at policy pieces. The broader the coalition you can build to support your ideas, the better opportunity you have to implement it. Is it going fast enough? I'd always wanted to go faster. I'm allowed to say that now on the other side of the fence from politics.
Well, it's a hard one to do. Like I was going to say, like the politics and the policy of childcare, you know, I also spent a lot of my career working on this file, and on the politics side, I always got told only women care about it, right? Like it's not a winner. And I never bought that. On the policy side, though, it's expensive and hard to implement is exactly right. It's a sort of alchemy of different policies coming together to actually manifest a space that is affordable and accessible and staffed. Yeah.
And it really is building, it's building, I believe, one of the most recent social policy pieces across this country. The fact that the federal government came in was critical, because provinces can't do it themselves. It has to be done in partnership, because it is, as you say, it's an expensive program. But the difference it can make in parents' lives, and therefore the difference it can make long-term to our economy, is massive, absolutely massive. If you're a parent and you're paying $10 a day for childcare compared to $2,000 a month for childcare, that changes your life. You then have those dollars to invest in communities. You then are able to support other small businesses in your community. There's huge spin-offs. But again, people left childcare because the wages were low. People weren't being recognized for their work. So those pieces are key. And that's what I'm so proud of that the government has done, is they've looked at all of the pieces. They aren't simply looking at, let's put the spaces out there and not worry about anything else. They're putting in wage enhancements for childcare providers. More spaces need to come on board, no question, but you also have to train the workers to be able to be in those spaces. And it's looking at accessible, affordable, quality childcare, which again, I think is really important, not to forget the quality piece when we're looking at the childcare agenda. So it's exciting. I'm glad to see the investments are continuing, but I think there's going to have to be discussions with both the provincial and federal governments about the money coming in, the amount of money that's being provided, support for childcare providers so they don't feel they're falling behind, because we saw a bit of that in Quebec. After the program was implemented in Quebec, we saw the quality fading because some of those services and supports weren't there. You started to see extra fees being charged. And so there's a lot of work still ahead. The fight certainly isn't done, but building that comprehensive system, from my perspective, is the strongest piece that we've got going, is we're building the framework. We're building the framework to make sure it isn't piecemeal, that is an actual system, and it will get there.
There were two other big files, and you don't need to maybe pick your favorite, but that were in your first budget that I think you mentioned that there were consensus calls for action, maybe not exactly the same actions, but childcare was one. Another one was reconciliation, and a third, I would say, is action on the environment. When you look back, it's not that long, to 2017, and then the debates that we see today on Indigenous rights and the Land Act having to be withdrawn, or say the carbon tax. Are there any cautions or flags you throw up as we head into an election about how those debates might unfold?
Well, I do worry, and I think it's both of those pieces kind of raise the issue of the inability to have good public discussions on topics and issues these days. I think both of those kind of fall in the camp of people pick sides very quickly. They don't want to hear from each other. They decide whether they like something or don't like something and go off into their camps and start fighting it. So the reconciliation piece was massive. To have the entire legislature stand up together, I mean, that was a historic day. There's no question. You could feel it in that place when you were in there. That this was righting a wrong. This was, as you talk about truth and reconciliation, this was putting the truth out there and doing something about it, and putting a reconciliation piece in place. And I remember the discussions, and Premier Horgan as well at the time, saying, this is the easy part. The tough part is still to come. The difficult part is now making it happen with agreement after agreement. And that's going to push the edges for everybody, because First Nations will have expectations, and the public will have expectations, and business will have expectations, and everybody's going to have to come to the table and have those conversations. And so it was an incredible direction. And I think, again, like everything, probably the pendulum will swing a little bit one way and a little bit the other as we start getting into those discussions. But what I worried about with the Land Act piece that came forward, and some of the public discussion, was a real misuse of the information, of the accuracy of the information of what was really going to happen. That this was going to take away the Haida Gwaii example, where Haida Gwaii got title to their land. This is going to take away private ownership. Well, no, it's not. In fact, the bill is very clear about that it doesn't touch public ownership. But we're getting into that kind of confrontational debate that we see happen so quickly in so many issues. And, if there was an issue I'm probably the most concerned about as a former politician, it is that issue, because we're never going to resolve these tough things unless we provide opportunities for the sides to come together and have a real conversation, not divide off. And I see it in so many discussions that are happening right now, federally and provincially. And I think it's a great worry. I think we should be concerned about it, because a strong democracy requires everyone to be able to have that conversation. Strong democracy requires compromise. It requires a give and take. And if we divide into our camps quickly and don't have those conversations, we misunderstand each other. We put out falsehoods. We never move the agenda ahead. And that issue, as well as the climate action, as well as childcare supports for people living in poverty or housing, all of those issues are complex. I often say that the really tough things are left on the table. The easy pieces were fixed already. The easy pieces have been taken on. Now we're into very tough discussions that don't sit in one portfolio. You're not dealing with just one area. You're in fact dealing across government, across ministries. Those are complex conversations. They require people from all different sectors to be able to come together. That's tough enough in itself. And then you put the issue on the table, and it makes it even more difficult. So the more opportunities, I believe, to have that kind of public consultation, to engage people from across sectors, again, coming back to kind of rebuilding the party and looking at getting rid of those left and right definitions and looking for opportunities to come together around values, I think is going to be more critical than ever.
Do you think, like, whichever government, comes back after in the fall, do you think there's the space for them to come back to the Land Act? And I say this because really, like, there was just a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion, and that lives, kind of out. It's like the genie's out of the bottle a bit. And I just want to, do you think the government, maybe mishandled this, and that the first most important thing would have been to try and keep that genie in the bottle and bring clarity to this, because so much of what unfurled it was wrong, was false.
No question, more discussion needs to happen. And the minister himself said that this was going to take more conversation. And I think that's very clear in bringing it forward. It's tougher after the act has come out and then people are criticizing it to go back and have that conversation. But I believe it's going to happen, and I believe it is important for it to happen, to go back to the beginning again, to talk about why this is critical, to talk about the court cases that have proven this over and over again. And do we want to still keep fighting things with legal costs, or do we want to actually sit down at the table and resolve these things? So I do believe there are opportunities. And as I said, I think the government admitted themselves that this was something that needed to have more consultation and more discussion.
Carole, when you go back to look at the trajectory of the NDP and the changes, I think if Mike McDonald was here, he'd be saying that the NDP, and this was certainly one of your legacies, I think, was able to renew and become more diverse in its caucus makeup than BC Liberals were. And a lot of that, I think, is due to the equity mandate, which really made sure that incumbent seats were held for equity-seeking candidates. That was the core thing. Women, people with disabilities, gender, queer, whatever. Is that work done, or does more need to be done? What's your take on that?
Well, it certainly was controversial when it came in. There are many people who said that it was a huge mistake bringing in the equity mandate. Anyone who is involved in politics knows, and it's not simply the Democrats that this happens at, but often, seats are kind of designated for the women or minorities or diversity that aren't the winning seats. And so that it was very clear that that was happening. Yes, we had women running. If you looked at the total number of candidates running, women, people of diversity, but often they were in seats that we weren't going to win or that we had challenges winning. So bringing in the equity mandate was a bold, no question, a very bold move to be able to say that if an incumbent steps down, it's a woman's seat until we reach equity. And again, we did that. We had both a cabinet as well as a caucus that reached that mandate. But like anything else, mandates have to keep shifting as well. And so I think there will be a next stage of looking at the equity mandate to be able to provide, because we reached equity around women. We can't let that one go. We have to make sure we continue to look at that piece, but we also need to look at diversity and more diversity in the legislature. And that government elected in 2017, again in 2020, showed huge increases in diversity because it's now part of a discussion in looking for candidates. And people will say, well, it's not fair to just, if it's a woman, the woman gets the spot. Well, in fact, you can have 3, 4, 5 really strong women running for a nomination race. It is still a race. If you can have an equity candidates, to presume that there's only one good woman to find, or, one person from a diverse population base. No, in fact, there are still very good races, very hard races to be run. But I think the equity mandate will broaden to look at not simply the candidates, but perhaps the constituent itself. Is the constituency diverse? Is the association diverse? Do you have people of diversity who can reach out to those communities to bring in people? So I think there are all kinds of opportunities to be able to look at continuing the work that was laid down in such a brave way, because it was a brave way. It's probably the piece. There are a few other pieces like speculation and vacancy tax and others that I got a lot of heat on being finance minister, but certainly as leader, when we brought in the equity mandate, people expected that we were going to have terrible candidates. We weren't going to be able to find people. And in fact, just the opposite happened. I'm very proud of that.
It's interesting. I always like to point out, and can't resist, as Canada has finally moved forward with actually having affordable childcare, there are 2 cabinets in particular that have been pushing for that, and they are the 2 gender balanced cabinets. And I think it's a really good example of how much that representation matters, and how much it's worth pushing for that, because without BC where it was, without the federal government leading on that file, people would still be paying, $5,000 a month to put 2 kids into, and I don't know how many people, and then in this affordability crisis. Yeah.
That's right. Payments higher than their mortgages that they were having to pay for childcare, and people making decisions about having children or not having children based on childcare fees and the cost that incurred for them. So couldn't agree more. I mean, having women around the table, progressive policies get discussed. It's not that the guys around the table still bring progressive policies forward, but you've got to push. You've got to push in a very personal way that makes a difference and doesn't let things go.
So, Carole, you got to a point in your career where everything was going great, and then you called a press conference and said you'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's and you were going to move on to a new life, which hardly looks like retirement to anybody who's seen it close up. But
I've decided my new goal is to make a new word for retirement.
Yes.
Because people that I know, everyone I know in my circle, no one has retired. They're still active and engaged. They're just making better choices.
Well, how has life been since you made that announcement? And when you look back on it, well, just tell us about it. How's it going?
Yeah. It is going well, thank you. And I think there's no question I made the right decision. As you know, I, along with other MLAs, went through a cancer scare as well at the beginning of my mandate in fighting cancer. And I promised myself and I promised my family if I got ill again with that kind of serious illness that I would step down. And so it was important for me to live up to that. My Parkinson's diagnosis now is just about 4 years going on. And while I have a few more symptoms, my balance is a little bit off, my tremor's a little bit stronger than it was. I have to watch pressure and stress because that has an impact. I have the time now to be proactive about the disease, and that's pretty critical because there is no cure for Parkinson's. It does progress. You can't do anything about the progression of the disease, but you can manage your symptoms, and the key is exercise. So I have a lot of my day, as people joke in my community, pacing around my community. I do 2 walks a day, so I walk 10K a day. I take 4 exercise classes, 2 boxing classes, and 2 high intensity fitness classes. And I'm really serious. I take it on as my work because it does make a difference to the symptoms. And as long as I can do that, I'll continue that connection. So, and I'm on a couple of boards that the government has appointed me to that keep me active and engaged. I'm teaching for the United Way for their Public Policy Institute. So I'm busy and engaged, but making better choices. I'm still, as my family will tell you, still terrible at saying no. I tend to take a little bit too much on. I have to be really careful of that. So I try and put guardrails around. I won't take a new committee on unless I give something up. A new board on. I won't take on the chair of a board because, as my neurologist said, go and give your opinion, give your views, but don't take on the responsibility of looking after it all. So I'm learning. It's a work in progress. I tell people my retirement.
It's actually a big mind shift too, right? I think to be deputy premier and minister of finance, and then to say like, I've got to slow down to keep going. How has that adjustment been? And how do you find treating the exercise as your job? I mean, I feel like for years you probably didn't have time to take care of yourself. How is that going?
Again, I'd say it's a learning experience. It is very hard to go from 100 miles an hour to slowing down. Very tough. And that's why I think being engaged in something, being involved in something is still critical. I still have the opportunity to be able to share my expertise and the things that I've learned and the lessons, both good and bad, that I can take to others, I think are very important to be able to do for yourself. But what I found is you do, after a few years, get to the place of saying, it's okay that I've got an hour to do my gardening. It's okay that I've got a chance to go for lunch with the friends that I didn't for 20 years because I was in politics and I had no time available. So you start to enjoy those pieces a little bit more, which I think makes a big difference as well, to keep those connections. I'm so fortunate. I have family in town. I have an incredible group of friends. And so, we continue our politics in coffee discussion groups over a bottle of wine and dinner. I mean, we haven't lost that political interest, but now we can say at the end of the conversation, but we're not responsible for it all anymore, remember? No. Which is always a really good reminder and kind of a stress reliever in itself.
I was going to say, great for the stress. And just for the record too, like, so you're on the board of NBC. You're still actively involved with the United Way's Public Policy Institute, which is fantastic to say too. And is there more? Yeah. There's another board.
Yeah, and I'm also on the Royal BC Museum board.
Yes.
And I'm also on the Parkinson's board. There's an amazing organization in Victoria called the Parkinson's Wellness Project, which is a group that provides exercise programs at no cost for people. They provide counseling. They're extraordinary, little tiny, mighty organization. So I've joined that board as well. So plenty for now.
Plenty. Well, and we're so glad you made time to join us today at Hotel Pacifico. Carole James, it was a pleasure having you on.
It was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Guests, last week we talked about the work the Nisga'a Nation is doing to create their own Indigenous owned and operated network. This week we are highlighting another key Indigenous connectivity story, this time along Highway 1. Hotel Pacifico regulars may recall hearing about the Hope River General Store and RV Park near Yale, where you can buy wild-caught salmon thanks to store owner Jolena Hope. Jolina's business has run much more seamlessly since access to high-speed internet services was expanded to the region in 2021. Processing payments, sending and receiving large files, and ensuring RV park residents stay connected to their friends and family. It all goes easier thanks to TELUS Pure Fiber. Because the store sits within one of the 11 rural, remote, and Indigenous communities and 850 households in the Upper Fraser Valley that now have access to high-speed internet services through a partnership and joint $3.8 million investment made by hometown teen TELUS and the Government of BC. In acknowledgement of the socioeconomic importance of connectivity in today's world, federal and provincial governments are working together to connect every British Columbian to high-speed internet by 2027. A partnership between TELUS and the BC government is what enabled the new fiber build for these 11 Upper Fraser Valley communities. It also marks a significant step toward these strategy objectives and is another milestone in bridging digital divides and driving economic reconciliation across Canada. Faster internet connection has also made it easier for the newly connected local governments in the region to serve their citizens, find efficiencies, and support their staff's potential to grow their community's interests. And residents say it's bringing people home, helping the region to be more than a place to pass through, but a beautiful place to call home. To learn more, check out the YouTube channel for the Connectivity Division of the Government of BC, Connected Communities BC, for a short video about what access to fiber optics has meant for the Yale and Shawatil First Nations.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
All right, it's good to have you back, Mike. You've been looking after the suite for us, the strategy suite?
Got caught in traffic today, couldn't make it to the hotel on time. Thanks, Geoff, for taking care of
That's
business with Kate.
Rock
Yeah,
solid alibi.
we tried to channel you for at least one question.
I was not caught up in merger discussions. Just to make that perfectly clear, or lack thereof.
Exactly. The merger that wasn't. What is next? Can we spend some time on this? Because I think it's worth. Really walking through a bit as a TikTok, even what has transpired over the recent days. With, I'll start with the offer that came from Kevin Falcon to John Rustad, and I want to start with you, Mike, a bit about what was in that offer and maybe what you think Kevin Falcon thought John Rustad might see in that offer.
Well, trying to piece it together from various reports, it does appear a deck or a presentation was made by BC United to the Conservatives, and the deal goes something like this. You get to protect your incumbents, we get to protect our incumbents, and then we'll allocate the ridings accordingly, with the Conservatives running 47 candidates and BC United running 46. Now, devil's in the details.
Very, very fair.
The Conservatives objected that, well, obviously the 28 or 27 or 28 seats of BC United or BC Liberals elected last election are the 28 best seats out there, and BC United would take a majority of those from the get-go and plus get some more beyond that probably. Now, a key part of this proposal that BC United made was that, okay, we're going to run as BC United on these sets of ridings, and BC Conservatives are running that set of ridings, and whoever gets the most seats will have a coalition, and that person becomes a premier.
Right.
Whoever's the leader with the most seats, right? So if Kevin Falcon got 25 seats and John Rustad got 24 seats, presumably Falcon would be the premier. Now, BC Conservatives didn't think that was such a great idea. First of all, they'd be yielding their polling strength in many ridings.
Masterful understatement.
Many ridings where they arguably could win. If BC United could, why can't they? So why do they need that? Anyways, we all saw the public reaction. We all saw the blow up, and BC United went and presented it, got rejected, then they went public. And they went public with the details, and they went public with the circumstances in terms of the participants in the meeting too, which drew some ire from some. So it looks like it's over. There's not going to be any formal arrangement. And that may be the case. In fact, I would say between parties, that probably is the case. unless there is some unexpected twist and turn ahead of us that we cannot foresee at this moment.
Well, Mike does a very dispassionate account of a breakup that had more rancor and bitterness than you would see between two opposing parties. Never mind two that were supposedly
Geoff,
trying to play on the same team. I mean,
I could not agree with you more.
A clown car of candidates, as
I
Kevin
haven't
Falcon said,
seen
with
this
regard
level. I have not seen this level of rancor and bitterness since John Horgan and Andrew Weaver.
before they
Shots
became
fired.
friends.
Before they reconciled. Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty bad between those two guys. Let's face it. Like before the
It was
election,
just a misunderstanding.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Anyways,
Were there F-bombs flying? Like, did Weaver?
Oh.
Yeah, like publicly. Like, was there?
John Horgan may or may not
Weaver,
have bought
Weaver
many
never
beers.
swore.
Weaver never swore. Yeah, yeah.
We'll have Dr. Weaver on the
that.
show sometimes to maybe talk about what his blood alcohol level was at that rugby game during negotiations.
Oh,
but
anyway, what a diversion. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the breakup.
I'm just saying, sometimes people can disagree and then agree.
Okay. So let's pause with this then and say, yeah, like it wasn't well received. Okay. How much do we look at this as a strategy to potentially merge two parties, or not merge, but to a collaboration between two parties who are at risk of at risk of eating each other up? And how much was this a strategy for Falcon at the end to be able to say, John Rasted's the guy who's in it for himself and not for the guy in it for the real prize, which is beating David Eby?
It looked like a trap in a way. It's like, okay, we're going to make the proposal. If they don't like it, boom, we're going public. And then that's it. Damn the torpedoes.
Yeah.
And because if it was a true negotiation, then, okay, they've rejected our offer. That's like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I didn't hear that the Conservatives said, we're never going to talk to you ever again. I didn't hear that out of all the coverage. But they obviously rejected the deal, and BC United walked away and did what they did. Now, Dimitri Panagopoulos, we've mentioned in previous shows, former pollster Christy Clark and pollster to the stars on the Conservative side of the federal Conservative side of the equation, and other provinces, took apart the deal and said it was a bad deal for the BC Conservatives. Why would they sign it? Also saw some commentary from a prominent Falcon supporter over the years who really objected to the way that deal was made public afterwards. Mm-hmm. So there's, definitely some...
Katie Merrifield, right?
Katie Merrifield.
Yeah. Very fair point. Right.
And so that's, internal stuff that's spilling out into the public. And the Conservatives are, their most recent poll, they're in the mid to high 30s, and BC United's below 15. So it's a very tough position for BC United to be in, to say we can go and do this on our own. And I think right now there's a lot of discussions going on among supporters of BC United about what exactly is going on here. And, it's maybe Kevin Falcon's only play right now to do that.
Well, Falcon reminds me a bit of the Monty Python knight whose head is sitting on the bridge, and he's showing it's just a flesh wound. It's just a flesh wound. What's the matter with you? Come on back. Are you a chicken or something? I mean,
no, come back. I'll gnaw your legs off.
That's right. I mean, he's railing away at John Rustad's team as a clown car of candidates. Today, there was some more stuff on X and Twitter about some of the reasons those may be accurate comments, but it's not the kind of thing you say if you think maybe after this big huff, we'll actually be able to get together. I don't see any deal at all with between Rustad and Falcon.
As of Thursday morning, he was willing to form a coalition government with them, and by Friday, it was, Well,
not really. When you break down what others said about the deal, I think, and you touched on it, Mike, there was a chance for the Conservatives to run in ridings where they would have a lesser chance of success.
Yeah.
They were going to have to go to their candidates in a bunch of ridings where they were hopeful, because they've traditionally been BC Liberal ridings, and ask those candidates to stand down. They were going to make unstated kind of commitment to observe a truce, even though they're trying to differentiate themselves on a bunch of policy matters. So then the leak of this document, which I guess is what happened, appeared to legitimately take them by surprise. And also, I think from the comments of some of the people who are watching this on the free enterprise side was dirty pool and the naming of people involved in the discussions and so on. So it's a very toxic mess, and it's another week in which the opposition parties have been saying more about each other very disparagingly than they've said about the NDP. So as a New Democrat, I think it's an excellent situation.
Well, let's come back. Let's come back to that, because I do think there's a lot for the NDP to take advantage of this, and there's some details I think they might want to change if they could. But staying with John Rustad and Kevin Falcon, I'm curious, Mike, if Kevin, it's because I think how this is painting is as Kevin Falcon is desperate, which I think is fair. Of course he's desperate given where the polls are in this moment in time. If he was desperate, what was this trying to do? Like, why was this the move of a desperate man?
Well, I think they're trying to show that the Conservatives were being unreasonable and that the Conservatives were the ones who were the problem. I think that's what the attempt was. I also feel like BC United really didn't have its heart into doing a deal either. They really don't like each other at a leadership level. But I think the pragmatic point here is that there are 16 BC United incumbents that are intending to seek re-election, and where do they fit into all this? So I think some of these discussions are centered around how they land, where they land, if they land.
But I've been involved in civic parties that have had their day and disappear, and I've helped start them. So it's obviously a minor league compared to this, but a political organization has to serve a political purpose, and if it has ceased to do so, it can't continue in any meaningful way. And that's the challenge before BC United right now. What are they for, and who are they for? The audience for this entire week of communications and stuff was presumably those in power economically who feel it's critical to have a not NDP option, who, for whatever reason, are not content to let the voters sort that out. And so when, as Mike says, Kevin Falcon wants to show that he did the best he could, that's the audience he's speaking to, because the voters are going to get to decide who did the best job on October the 19th. And so this was very much sort of a backroom inside baseball conversation that they were having. And it's not clear that either of them really had their heart in it. They were doing it for credibility reasons with a group of people who are important, but no longer as important as they think they are. I think that's what is interesting politically. Whether the Conservative Party can demonstrate its utility to them and voters in the weeks ahead will be one of the most interesting parts of the election.
Well, there's some members of BC United who are in a really shitty position, right? Like to your point, Geoff, about where to go from here and what you can build. Like, you have this really desperate move from Kevin Falcon and a movement now to push him out.
Let's just stop on that point.
There is
a website out there that's calling on him to resign. I don't have 100% confirmation on this, but it's from an individual who's never much of a BC Liberal, frankly. A bit of a political character in the hinterland. So I don't see evidence that there is a movement to call for Kevin's resignation beyond one guy with a WordPress site. So just on that, not to underestimate the level of challenge Kevin has in keeping everything glued together in the short run, which is a considerable challenge. And people may feel that. It's just that they're not voicing it publicly to a great extent at this point.
Well, I think a lot of the people who supported other leadership candidates not that long ago to be in the job that Kevin's now in are thinking, oh, if only. To Kate's point, I'm gonna run again. I'm gonna put in 4 more years, and what can I be sure of? That I'll be a backbencher. So having him resign is hardly a solution. It may just make things even worse. But it's hard to see right now how BC United forms government or provides those kind of opportunities. So incumbents who are re-upping for BC United must be asking themselves, or hoping in some respects, probably deep down, that they lose. Then they can exit with honor. On the Conservative side, though, there's a difficulty for Rustad, although he doesn't appear to acknowledge it, that people are rushing to his banner who he would prefer not to have, and he doesn't have the infrastructure or probably the political bandwidth to sit down and make some hard judgments about that. But I think it's interesting that Kevin Falcon is still saying we can't have certain people in BC United because they're inconsistent with our values. And those values, I think he's talking about social conservative values, about anti-abortion values, about homophobic values, that he doesn't want to have any. You don't hear that from Rustad. And that's going to be an interesting part of the debate in the period ahead, because they may or may not be vote determining, but they're problematic between those two sides.
So I want to pick up on Geoff's point, like they want to lose. I took that as they want the party to lose, right? Like I don't think any of them are saying like personally they want to lose, right?
No one wants to lose.
I think in their dark moment, well, I don't know. In your dark moments, you've signed up because you think, wow, we could beat these guys, and I could be in cabinet. And then 3 months later, you think, no, we won't beat these guys, and I won't be in cabinet.
Okay.
Mike's turn.
Yeah, Mike's turn. Let's be nice to him. He's had a hard.
First of all, I agree with Geoff about the infrastructure of the BC Conservatives. It's almost as weak as David Eby's leadership campaign. But
Kaboom! Mic drop.
Ooh, you were just stewing on that one for a while, Mike McDonald.
I was waiting to get that in there.
Solid.
Okay. I might have told you in the past about this Big Bang theory that I've got.
It's come up.
And I want to just revisit that for a moment. Okay.
Okay, we're going we're looking through the.
Can all go to rosedeer.blog and see it for yourself.
It hasn't aged well, Mike.
It has aged very well. It is aging to perfection. It's peaking right now. Okay, there's 3 ways the Big Bang has happened in British Columbia political history since 1941. In 1941, it was let's make a deal. The 2 parties made a deal. Okay, we saw that last week. Didn't work. Okay. Second, the voters choose at election time. W.A.C. Bennett and went straight to power. 1991, Gordon Wilson comes raging out of the wilderness and took 10 years to finally get to power, but it realigned the political spectrum under the BC Liberal banner. The third is coalition by migration, where people move with their feet before the election. That's 1975. Bill Bennett absorbing 3 high-ranking Liberal MLAs and a Conservative, and actually an NDP as well, by the way, Frank Calder, and brought this new amalgamated caucus. It wasn't official deals with the other parties. It was just people leaving their party and coming to the Socreds.
3
what?
3 electeds, 3 MLAs moving.
5.
Okay, sorry. 5.
Yeah, at that time. And others outside the party too, like Bill Van Der Zam had been a Liberal and he joined the Social Credit Party. Anyways, I digress.
Okay.
The point is, right now, we are on the precipice of seeing whether we are going to see people from BC United move with their feet to the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Either they are or they're not. If they do, that would remove the threat of a vote split, not reduce it completely, but that would remove the worst scenario is that the BC Conservatives get like 30% of the vote and BC United gets 20% of the vote. Nobody will win in that case. But if one gets 40 and one gets 10, much better chance, right? So it all comes down to, are people, frankly, I think unless something dramatic happens, the issue of who's going to be leading the Free Enterprise forces into the election as the contender at this moment looks like it's gonna be the Conservatives. I mean, let's look at the poll results. I mean, it's tough to argue with that. And unless BC United can turn it around quite suddenly, and I do not know how they're going to do it. So if that was the case, then the question is, will the Conservatives actually be able to consolidate more support, meaningful support, the kind of support which comes with organization, infrastructure, money, all that stuff, and actually launch a viable campaign to challenge the NDP. And that's a tall ask for a party that's just basically only been around in essence for a year. So that's how I see it right now. I see there's still, if there's a window before the election, it is people moving with their feet. And if they don't, if they don't agree with that, if they think it's all a big Ponzi scheme and that the Conservatives are just, it's the air is going to be let out of the balloon once people realize who these guys are, and they're going to come back to BC United.
Like a Ponzi scheme of polling? How is it a Ponzi scheme?
Just like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Poll result begets poll
Yeah.
result, and all of a sudden the voters wake up and say, we don't want these guys.
Well,
That's what I think the argument is for people who haven't gone over yet.
Well, isn't it fair to, like,
aside
again,
from
I'm
the
not
policies that they have.
like, I'm not defending I think the criticisms of what Kevin Falcon offered John Rostad are very fair. And I do think it's really important to be clear-eyed about the importance of that infrastructure and the number of incumbents they have. And like, it's just, that is, and I think what's interesting, I mean, if the writ were to be called today, and we may yet get a test of this depending on how the next couple of months play out, but you would get a really good read of how much that infrastructure matters compared to the kind of raw polling of sort of public sentiment and leanings, right? Like, it's really interesting. And I struggle to kind of quantify in my head what that's worth and how that's going to play out. And it's gonna be very different riding to riding.
Well, especially when you see in the conservative side that they don't have, I assume, I can't imagine how they would have any kind of mature constituency organization, especially in the winnable ridings when they've had such a tiny organization for the last period of time. And I think in the the last election was a COVID election where volunteers and a lot of the human infrastructure and human capital that you need in a campaign wasn't as critical because so much was done virtually.
Yes.
This will be very different, and it's a kind of a post-COVID campaign, but also in a maturing social media environment. And I'm not sure how easy it will be to get volunteers. I know in the NDP, the recruiting of volunteers is crucial and more difficult. I don't think the NDP is different than anybody else in that regard. And then but to overcome some of those difficulties, you do need solid, seasoned people at the center who are able to give guidance to newcomers or new campaign managers and all that other stuff out in the ridings.
I think
so.
Well, more than anything, they need at the center of the campaign seasoned issue managers and people honing and refining the message and having a plan for every 28 days of the RIP period.
Yeah.
And great advertising.
And they're going to have a crew
with no
of
money.
People. Yeah.
Well, how do you know they won't have any money if they look like they're going to be the main contender? The money's
well, they don't have a lot of runway to bring money.
I'd be, as I've said before, I'd be less concerned about the money. I mean, they're if it's the Conservatives, they're running with a hot brand, and they've got issues that the top issues are work for them: affordability, crime, even housing, even healthcare. They've got something to say about that. That's put the government on the defensive. You can throw in Land Act because that gets their base fired up, but it's there's lots for them to talk about. The question is, how can they do it in a coherent way, in an effective way? But that can overwhelm the need for infrastructure, as it has. This is why the NDP won in Chilliwack last election. Once it's on with the public, it doesn't matter how many workers are out in the field. The voters are going. The voters are going that way. Now, I'm not saying the Conservatives are there yet, that they're just going to sweep the province. I think they got a couple problems. I think they're potentially they're hitting a ceiling now, and they got to get higher. And secondly, when you look at the underlying demographics of their support, the older people are less likely to vote for them. It's the opposite of everything I was taught as a young child, that old people are conservatives. and right now it's the face of the NDP voter. I'm looking at him right now. It's Geoff Meggs.
Yeah.
Old guy.
Yeah.
But the NDP are looking at a 10 to 15. They're looking at a 10 to 15 point lead with 55 plus voters who represent over half of the electorate. So the Conservatives would have to figure out how they are going to, and that's probably disproportionately BC United are doing better with older people.
Yeah.
But also I think older likely voters are paying more attention to all this stuff, and they're less convinced that the Conservative, this is my opinion only, they're less convinced that the Conservatives can do this, can govern properly. They need to be, whereas maybe younger people are like, we're so frustrated, we're so burnt out, we're fried, just give us anything,
Yeah.
And they're responding to Polyev, and
they're more the protest vote.
They're listening to Jordan Peterson audiobooks. I don't know what else they're doing, those Gen Zs. But but in 2013, the reason why the polls both the pollsters, except Dimitri, got it wrong, is that they didn't wait for turnout. And Christie had a big edge with older people, and Dix had a big edge with younger people, but the younger people didn't turn out to vote. So it's the opposite right now in the polls between Eby and Rustad. So there's a lot of work the Conservatives do have to do in the next 3 months if they're serious about winning. And I assume they're serious about winning.
Well, there's this, yeah. Well, there's this other piece, just picking up on that, Mike, like if a lot of this rise in this popularity with younger conservative voters is really on the back of Poilievre, I think it's a really good question to ask, how much are they going to come out in October when it's not, federal election, right? And again, and then, they don't have the same human capital, right? Okay, I'll take your point. Maybe they can make it up on the capital, but they definitely don't have the same human capital feet on the ground. So like that could come together for an underwhelming performance.
It's a really interesting, the BC election, I would say it's very rare for federal politics to be so influential in a provincial election campaign. I think
in BC, other provinces,
in BC. Going back into the vault, there was actually a 1979 provincial election which overlapped the federal campaign. So there might have been a little bit of commingling there, especially on the NDP side, where it's a unified party. But this time, like the anti-Trudeau stuff really fires up the Conservatives. And they're absolutely wrapping themselves in the Poilievre flag of the BC Conservatives, which is maybe working for them in the very short term, but will be a liability for them in the long term and will stunt their growth as a party. But right now, I mean, the BC election this October is setting up to be a bit of a proxy fight for the federal election. And Poilievre, this might be good or bad for Poilievre, depending on what happens, as a signal of what's ahead. How real is it? As you say, how real is it that these young people are going to actually get down to it and vote Conservative, as the poll suggests they intend to?
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting, and I have to say, we have to note, we did see our pod colleague Corey Tonight last week, and I'd say the curse of politics and Corey, they're all fascinated. All eyes are on BC right now, and it is sort of, we are bringing the popcorn to the.
I'm fascinated by Corey's wardrobe, and also his fine head of hair. I mean, this guy is a clothes horse. He's I don't know what else he is. He's just right out of the pages of, what is it? Is there like a Toronto fashion magazine or something like that? He hardly looks like hardly looks like the face of federal conservatism, but maybe he is the face of that.
Who knows?
Have
they changed?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's a shifting demographic there. I could say for me, he could, like, there's a version of a like John Tory Toronto conservative that he fits for me.
Oh, okay.
But this might be, more of this Ontario BC translation. Let's pause for a second though, because I think I did say to you, Geoff, that we wanted to come back to talk about, what this means for David Eby. And I think, the headline on this, Geoff, certainly is that this, I'm sure he's not losing any sleep, but is the timing right? Are there pitfalls in this perhaps for David Eby and his prospects of re-election?
No, I don't think it's ever a bad time for your opponents to engage in a horrible mud match like this, which is what's happening. And I don't see it ending very soon. Maybe it will. Maybe Mike is right and there'll be an effective shift, but I don't think it's possible for BC United to completely disappear before the election. So there'll continue to be some kind of a factor, unless Kevin Falcon resigns and tells everybody, you're right, I should never have done this. Yeah, I don't see that happening. But he's been really harsh to Rustad and to the other people there. Maybe he's not using any intermediaries or secondary people. But for David Eby, the question, I think, is in what is in some respects a change election. And I agree with Mike, we're seeing a big tectonic shift in politics in the province in some respects. What vision he advances for the province, what sorts of things he projects need to happen and should happen, how he advocates for some of the key legacies of the administration so far, And, you know, coming out of the session, I don't think it was entirely clear that they were on that track. So the challenge for the NDP over the next little while is to clarify that proposition they're going to make to the voters, because just counting on the right to remain divided is not going to be adequate in my view. And I think they have to put together a strong, positive campaign about the things that people are concerned about. And I was interested in going back to our conversation with the pollster, suddenly named, oh no, I guess it was on, maybe it was the Rage Index. Yeah, the Rage Index and the discussion of inequality, which is not a term that you normally hear around politics, but the rising concern about inequality, I think, it may be that housing affordability and some of those issues are proxies for that inequality fight. And it'd be good for people with access to the numbers and the time and the resources to think it through, to analyze that, because there's a lot that the NDP administration can say about that topic that it's doing and has done, which I don't think we're going to hear much from on the other side. But that one stuck with me. What was his name? I'm sorry, here, Kate.
Dan Arnold, when he came and spoke
Dan
about
Arnold,
the radio. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, but that's a really
that just stuck with me.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I think the thing about the Rage Index and that inequality measure is, and this is where I was sort of wondering if there might be a bit of concern for EB. The Rage Index is picking up on the fact that people are angry. David Eby's sort of not been the focus of the ire, but that who is going to be the champion of more equality, who's going to tear down inequality, is less sticky. And I think Poilievre is effectively positioning himself as more of a champion of equality and looking out for the little guy. And what's interesting is we've seen Poilievre I think he's sort of torn down Trudeau so much that he sort of needed to turn his attention elsewhere. Eby became convenient. We're now seeing the poll, a convenient kind of foe on that argument. We're now seeing the poll show a rise and an effectiveness of Poilievre here. And the problem with this merger stuff and this drama is it's impossible to look away from. It's consuming all the oxygen. And it really leaves us spending a lot of time talking about this sort of anti-Eby sentiment. And I think if I was in Eby's camp, I'd be a little bit worried that the legacy of we're just too far out for the election, that not to be worried that the voters could shift and that people would start to see, lose some of the social permission they feel right now to forgive Eby for the stuff he's not solving. And make him the target of the rage.
I mean, the approval ratings for David Eby remain pretty good. They're not as great as they were, and as we've said in previous podcasts, the overall support is drifting down. But that's all trumped by the problems on the right. Just when you think they're going to get quiet, they explode.
Well,
and that can't continue forever, though, I think.
Yeah, but as I've teased before, problems on the right probably don't have a chance of winning. Just keep thinking that way. Those can vaporize quickly. If all of a sudden, the momentum goes towards one way or another and the people move with their feet, I believe there is a hunger, let's call it the free enterprise support base, to win. And now it may have depending on if it is conservative led, it may have a hard ceiling and it may not ultimately succeed. But I do believe that, a lot of people say, just tell me who to vote for, and I think we're in that clarification process right now as to how this is really going to work. I don't think it's going to last much longer, but it's once there is a crystallization of that, it will be a failure if it's not clear. Clearly, people want it to be clear, and the winnability of the whole thing, it needs to be clear. If there's a vote split, they're dead. Both parties are dead. So,
okay. Do we have time to talk about nominations? There is.
Well, since we've got your urge to merge this week, talk about mergers, I want to make one more point on this whole situation. And Geoff was talking about it earlier, and you were talking about it all, about the NDP and what they have to do and how they have to position. I look at things more geographically, because it all comes down to ridings at the end of the day. And I think the EB folks, they need to build a big orange wall that's going to go down maybe it's a barge. I don't know. It goes down the Pitt River and it crosses over into Langley, down 200th Avenue, and literally goes down the Serpentine River and blocks the Conservatives from crossing that line. Because the Conservatives are going to could potentially, or call it the free enterprise option, whatever that is, I'm assuming it's Conservative at this point. It comes roaring out of the interior with 20, 21 seats, like it has in the past, and takes back the Fraser Valley, which many NDPers will contend that that's not going to be easy, but that would be the low-hanging fruit. And poof, you're up to 28, 29 seats before you get to the Big Orange Wall. The pathway beyond the Big Orange Wall is through South Surrey, Richmond, Delta, South Vancouver, a couple on the North Shore, maybe cherry-pick Westwood Plateau, and some seats north of Malahat. And that's the geography of all this. And that's where I see it less about groups. I see it less in an issue frame as much as I see it in like, well, what's it going to take to win those ridings? And that's, to me, that's the chess game that is afoot right now.
All right.
I would agree. That's the tough area. Yeah. That's the battleground.
All right. I like ending on agreeing. All right. Let's I think the one nomination that was on our radar was so John Aldag, the federal liberal, the federal Liberals moving to Cloverdale Langley. And we know who he's running against then.
So he's the MP in Cloverdale Langley. But I think he's running for the nomination in Langley Abbotsford.
Langley Abbotsford.
Yeah, to be clear on that. It's a new riding. There's no incumbent running there. I believe the other two NDP MLAs in Langley are running in the other two Langley ridings. Andrew Mercier and Megan Dykeman. It's my understanding, Geoff. I think what I understand. So this is new riding, which is going to be a really tough riding for Aldag to win, incidentally, because I mean Langley Abbotsford, they're not normally NDPers out there, and certainly not normally Trudeau Liberals. So he obviously wants to leave federal politics one way or another. So, and he's resigned his. It's reported that he was resigning his seat. Yeah, which brings up another thing, which is going to be a federal by-election out there in the next 6 or 7 months. So I'm sure.
Maybe his math was, maybe he doesn't want to leave politics. Maybe his math was, well, BC United and Conservatives are going to split the vote. I'm going to take this riding that's not usually live, right?
Maybe.
I mean, I feel it's better than the self-immolation theory, I think. All right. Okay, we'll come back to these. Any others you guys wanted to highlight before we move on and grab a drink?
I think, BC United is still announcing candidates. I know they announced one in Courtney Comox the other day, which is interesting because the Conservative in Courtney Comox is certainly getting beat up a lot for his social media comments. So that's, at this point, it's interesting to see where the gaps are on nominations, where BC United hasn't nominated, where the Conservatives haven't nominated, because that creates opportunities for clarifying candidacies if they're, people need a place to go and things like that. But I think the good ridings are getting pretty close to being taken here.
All right. Okay. That's a good check. Let's go grab a drink.
I want to get personal and share my family's energy story. Black thermal coal. Over a century ago, my grandmother's family mined it under the Atlantic seabed off of Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Some moved west to apply their skills to underground mining in Drumheller. That's where my grandparents met. There were dozens of coal mines in the Badlands, and my grandfather had the high-grade mine and the Rose Deer mine. Coal was how millions of Canadians heated their homes for generations. And when my mother was growing up in Vancouver, her home was heated by sawdust. Vancouver would have smog thicker than pea soup in the 1940s because of sawdust burning in households across the region. When I was a kid, our home in Haney, find that on a map, was heated by oil. The big oil truck used to come to our house to fill up our massive oil tank. When I was a high school kid, The gas network was extended to my neighborhood and our heating became a lot cleaner. Today, I lean on both gas and electricity for home heating. Fortis BC also has deep roots when it comes to energy in our communities. Their first hydroelectric dam was built near Nelson in 1897, and Fortis BC's Tilbury LNG facility has been safely operating in Delta for more than 50 years, storing energy for when our province needs it most. Today, gas infrastructure connects over 1 million homes and businesses throughout BC. And like the shift from coal to heating oil to natural gas, our province's energy system continues to change. Fortis BC is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by transitioning away from delivering conventional natural gas to delivering renewable and low-carbon gas. Gas, along with electricity, is an integral part of a diversified energy system. Thanks to Fortis BC for letting me share my family's energy story. What's yours? Fortis BC. Energy for a better future and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
Even though it's not in response to Mike being mean to David Eby about his leadership campaign, I do want to toast David Eby for the announcement last week of a hydrogen facility that will put in $900 million of investment, about 300 jobs, and get going on hydrogen distribution for our transportation sector. He finally unlocked the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which has existed for a long time, but up till now, I don't think made any contribution to stuff here in BC. So a good news economic announcement that kind of got buried by everything else we've been talking about.
All right, glass raised. Mike?
I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to take a shot at Dimitri Panagopoulos because I keep pumping his tire. I keep pumping his tires in the show, and he hasn't agreed to come on as a guest yet.
Oh, nice. Yes.
So I think my favorite Greek pollster, come on to Hotel Pacifico, come and drink some ouzo and, bring your finest bottle of olive oil. And we'll finally discuss these things rather than me having to quote your brilliance all the time.
Yeah, it's annoying.
So, and that's it for good comments about Dimitri, or any positive comments about Dimitri after the show. Unless he comes on, I'm done. I'm cold turkey on this guy.
They're kicked out of the hotel until he comes on.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because I was going to raise a glass, and I was going to raise a glass about a tweet. And I was going to say, like, sidebar, like when all the news was breaking on the offer from Kevin Falcon, I was sort of like doing the math in my head going like which ridings, blah, blah, blah. And when Dimitri tweeted out the sort of like sober takedown, I was like, oh, thank you. And now I'm done. I've got it out of my system. I'm not going to say anything nice about Dimitri until he comes on. I'm also joining. I'm joining in. And so the tweet I did want to, and this is such an obvious thing, but I do want to raise a glass to Jas Johal for the tweet about free enterprise speeding in a speeding car hurtling towards a brick wall driven by a boomer with poor insight, sketchy brakes, bald tires, and air safety bags that expired in 2017. Also complaining about the size of the cup holder. Like, that is the most masterful tweet. I mean, like, send me one that is better. One political news tweet that is better in the last year. Like, that is poetry, no notes. Congratulations on my favorite tweet I've seen in ages, Jas Johal. And my glass is raised to you.
Very good. Agreed.
All right. So that's it for another episode of Hotel Pacifico. I want to thank our guest, Carole James, for joining us. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, folks. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.